These LEGO games are precisely what they say on the tin. LEGO Indiana Jones: The Original Adventures is, like the LEGO Star Wars games before it, an adaptation of Indy's first three movies, Raiders of the Lost Ark, The Temple of Doom, and The Last Crusade. Like LEGO Star Wars' first entry, which released near the release of Revenge of the Sith, Indiana Jones came out basically alongside Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, although it thankfully dodges the bullet of adapting that movie. As with the prior LEGO games, it was developed by Traveler Tales, presumably as an extension of the Lucasarts deal they scored with Star Wars. Like their prior LEGO game, this game also saw release on everything. Even more actually. PC, Xbox 360, PS2, PS3, Wii, and of course their DS and PSP conversions. Indiana Jones is basically perfect when it comes to the LEGO format. Each movie is essentially a collection of set pieces strung together with occasional pieces of navigating dangerous areas full of traps and puzzles. Of every property Traveler's Tales is adapted into a LEGO game, this is quite possibly the one that makes the most sense. While the general gameplay is the same as LEGO Star Wars, wander through linear levels beating down enemies and solving basic puzzles, there's been a few changes to the character ability lineup, but the levels also have generally stronger designs. Bigger set pieces, enabled both by the nature of the series the game is based on and being less tethered to the 6th generation consoles. Puzzles that are actually simple puzzles instead of switching the characters to activate specific switches, wider enemy variety, and the item system all make this game a little more interesting to go through. The character overalls carry a lot of weight for one. All the characters can now attack, no more C-3PO tier glorified keycards. Secondly, most characters lack immutable traits. Indiana Jones has his whip, used to grab stuff from a distance or swing across certain gaps. All women are high jumpers, plus Willie specifically can scream to shatter glass, which is a fun nod to the fan reception of her character, and children can crawl through small vents. Most characters, even the women and children, start with one item and potentially a hat, which enables them to interact with obstacles. Shovels can dig up buried items, wrench can fix broken machinery and vehicles, books can translate rune panels to open passageways behind them, spears can hit far off targets, bazookas and grenades can destroy silver objects, and swords can cut ropes. While the Nazi hats open Nazi doors, and the thuggy hats, the evil cultists from the Temple of Doom if you don't remember, can be used to activate statues. While each of these items can be default on some characters in the story or in free play, they can also be taken from enemies or found in the environment, with many puzzles in the game rewarding these items to give any character the ability that's needed at the time. On one hand, this means no character is ever useless. As the level progresses, the player will eventually be forced to grab these objects to progress, nearly without fail. Even the player not controlling Indy maintains their importance throughout, although it can also be seen as a negative. For one, most characters lose a lot of their individuality. Indy always has his whip, but most of the secondary story characters end up being a cycle of whatever item is needed for a given room, especially as Indy's whip often means he can't be stuck digging up some puzzle element. Secondly, when playing alone, Indiana can clear most levels alone. They certainly try to make it a balance, but very often Indy can just pick up the relevant item and do everything himself, which leads into the third. Because characters can only hold one item at a time, a lot of puzzles become very transparent due to being forced to give the player a relevant item whenever it's needed. Which is a shame, as a few parts of this game could be really neat if items were held for the whole level and acted as simultaneous puzzle elements. On multiple levels, I think it's pretty safe to say that LEGO Indiana Jones is the most fun game so far. Its level designs and concepts are strong, as I'll touch on briefly, and the puzzle elements, and often the platforming elements, are allowed to shine much brighter since every character has largely the same abilities, and the increased power of the 7th gen consoles allows the levels to more accurately portray the huge set pieces the Indiana Jones franchise is built around. The next gen jump also has a decent impact on the game's visuals. The complete saga was held back a little bit due to working to upgrade the visuals for games from the prior generations, which means there's a pretty noticeable jump even from the brief time between this game and the last. Characters, especially Indy, are notably more animated, with smooth bends and curves when rolling, attacking, and running. Levels are given much more going on in them too, in part because so many take place outside. More characters can be on screen, with a few brief areas pretty stuffed with them, and the game, unsurprisingly, runs basically flawlessly, at least on the Series X, although I'm unsure if it was this smooth on the 360, honestly. I remember it being a little choppy on the Wii, but it's been a long time since I played that version. The cutscenes still have the goofy, slapstick tone of the Star Wars games, and all three movies are pretty clear and understandable despite their frequent sight gags. The lack of voice acting for the series means that they need really solid visual direction to pull this all off, which is kinda cool. The music is also, it's John Williams' Indiana Jones score with a few softer remixes. It's incredible as it always was, and basically outside of the scope of this game. Raiders of the Lost Ark hits pretty much every note you'd hope. It begins with the opening scene, including an extremely faithful recreation of the famous boulder chase that's just perfect. It also does a decent job of tutorializing the basic item mechanics, indie stuff, and the only thing to really complain about is that even in comparison to some of the other levels in this game, the second player really is the bitch character. This guy dies to a spike trap like 2 minutes into the movie. This goes directly into getting Marion in the mountains. Marion's inherent high jump ability means that for most of the rest of Raiders, the second player isn't nearly as bad off as the first level. The first boss fight uses a neat mechanic exclusive to this game. Like items, certain environmental objects, chairs, bottles, torches, can be picked up and thrown as impromptu weapons. A pretty neat feature that's forced on you to let you know it's an option. City of Danger condenses the entire Middle Eastern city segment of the movie. It's honestly a bit generic. You need to get keys, cross roofs, and fight guys, and you notably don't get to shoot the swordsman, but it's a solid level if a bit of a stretch for designing a level out of things that happen in this movie. The Well of Souls, where the Ark is found, shows off some nice improvements to level design. Traps litter the area, making the tombs feel a little dangerous. Indy's fear of snakes means that Marion needs to do some of the heavy lifting at times, and it actually has puzzles. Nothing Silent Hill tier, but baby steps for this franchise. Collecting golden balls to open the pathway forward, or doing some moderately tricky platforming while player 2 manipulates the platforms is good stuff. Pursuing the Ark is an odd collection of mismatched ideas. The first few bits in the army base are some of the game's least interesting points. The fight with the Heavy by the plane is reduced to this really awkward gimmick where you need to get him to punch anvils instead of actually using the plane to kill him like in the movie, which is disappointing and weird. But the ending fight on the back of the truck is a really neat finale. Lastly, the opening of the Ark is basically a contrived boss fight, as these games tend to have sometimes. Chase the guy around, climb up to him by building stuff, punch him a few times. It lacks any real creative use of the mechanics to end on. It's a Darth Maul-esque button masher with a few extra steps. Raiders is a really good start to the game. Outside of a bit of a slump at the end, it shows off why Indiana Jones is such a good franchise for this game's format. Temple of Doom, of course, begins with Indy slaughtering a bunch of Asian people. Willie's an immediate presence, so player 2 always has something to work with, and Indy is poisoned at the start, making him mostly useless, which is a fun little dynamic for this little tiny bit of the level. Temple of Doom does kind of have the oddest structure of these movies. After the opening, a lot of the first half is relatively slow before exploding near the end. Most of the second level is riding elephants in the forest and smashing up the palace, a little generic and boring. And the third level is all in the caves. With Willie kidnapped, Short Round is used instead, but equally gets his own moments to shine. A little fight at the sacrifice room kind of transitions this chapter into the more exciting back half of the movie. Free the Slaves is a really funny level name. Freeing the little slave children is used to progress through the levels, and it has a sort of neat boss where Short Round has to fight the little Indian child while Indy fights the big guy. It's one of the best uses of co-op in any of these LEGO games so far. The minecart ride is the only traditional vehicle mission in this game. Each player has their own cart and can swing a shovel to attack outwards to hit enemies and activate switches. While it's a really cool set piece in the movie, here there's no real tension. Enemies on the other tracks don't actually attack you, they're just required for a mini-kit. There's no obstacles at all, you can just mindlessly swing off to the direction you're on, and eventually it just ends the segment, which is kind of disappointing for one of the movie's coolest bits. Lastly, the big bridge battle is fine. Using the swords to cut the ropes between fighting goons and hitting Mola Ram a couple times is functional, but the combat in this game is as nothing as ever. It's pretty much the most button-mashy thing you could hope for, and it's a fairly weak twist on a boss fight overall. Temple of Doom as a movie is often seen as the franchise's black sheep. It's a weird movie in a lot of ways that make it the least fitting to translate into a game like this, which makes it largely the weakest part of this game. The Last Crusade is a near-perfect movie, and its structure makes it perfect for this game. It's got variety, puzzles, action, plus it's a pretty funny movie, so the slapstick here is a little fitting. Almost immediately, it begins on neat stuff. Getting into the church, exploring everything, and breaking into the catacombs below. Coffins all booby-trapped with spikes, but which also hold hidden skeletons for a mini-kit. Swimming in the musty water to create platforms. It's a solid if simple intro. The castle rescue sequence where Indy is reunited with his father starts slow but leads into a flaming library escape that will not technically dangerous or timed or anything, which would give it a little bit more tension. Is presented pretty well to feel like it is. And after you escape, you get to use the bazooka for a bit. Bazookas are just fun to use. Motorcycle escape is a bit of a hybrid vehicle level. The motorcycles are needed at multiple points to jump large gaps or open doors, but Indy and Senior need to get off at multiple times to solve puzzles or punch some Nazis. It's a nice balance that doesn't completely derail the gameplay like most vehicle missions did in the previous game, or the one in the previous chapter, but still offers a little bit of variety on what these levels typically are. The airship level and the stuff on the ground after is the only slightly low points. They're another fine level, but without the bombastic flair of most of this chapter. The desert stuff could be the same, but both the boss fight against the tank, dodging its explosive shots while setting mines to destroy it, and the first fight on top of the tank are both really neat set pieces. And of course, there's the final stage. Temple of the Grail is basically perfect. The invisible walkways, crossing the collapsing floor, a series of deadly traps and obstacles, and finding the Grail while being pursued by the undying Crusader are all perfect homages and recreations of the movie. My only real complaint is that outside of the game making the area where the Grail is obvious by making it the hardest to reach, if you haven't seen the movie, you probably wouldn't really know what Grail you're looking for. It does stand out visually, but it's also somewhat made to blend in, which feels a little clumsy. It's the first time that one of these games has ever felt like you kinda need to know what's going on to actually play it. The Last Crusade is perfect, basically. It hits every note it needs to capture the movie, does it really well, and nails an ending with probably the best LEGO level in the series thus far. In a much appreciated move, LEGO Indy removed a lot of the forced bonus content that plagued the latter two LEGO Star Wars games. Stuff like Super Story and Challenge Mode was exhausting nothing content that forced the player to grind through the same relatively few levels over and over. Indy reduces it to the bare minimum, which most games following this would copy. 10 mini-kits a level and 1 red brick, which unlocks useful extras. It's nice and breezy and lets the game be a short and sweet experience without a ton of padding and grinding. The game features 3 bonus levels of varying quality. Young Indy is actually the opening to The Last Crusade. I assume at one point this game's adaptation was going to start here, but it was made a bonus for mostly being unrelated to the main stuff going on. One player is the titular Young Indy, one is Boy Scout. And while the start of the caves is fine, the ending bit on the train is great, if just for the spectacle of running around on top of a train, which is always cool. Ancient City is the new LEGO City, an open area with a lot to destroy that ends at a million studs, and while I like the theming with its ancient runestone cover, it has the same issues as LEGO City. Eventually you end up 1,000 studs short and it devolves into tedium. Finally, the warehouse is a simple creative mode, allowing players to make a racetrack out of simple pieces to race various vehicles. The unfortunate camera angle, lack of a timer, and the limitations of this game's camera system for multiplayer races means that I can't even really imagine messing with it. Like LEGO City, it's completed by getting 1 million studs, although here there's a large target in the back that can be shot to generate them infinitely, so you can just leave whenever you see fit. It's a fine set of bonuses, I suppose. To the right person, the warehouse could be a lot of fun, and implementing a creative mode in a LEGO game seems like a no-brainer. Young Indy is fine but brief, but I must say the LEGO City remixes are getting a bit tired, as they're basically all the same thing and basically all devolve into tedious scrounging, especially as I never really found them all that great in the first place. Unlike Star Wars, I haven't really talked about the Indiana Jones movies to death on this channel yet, so let me cover them real quick. Raiders of the Lost Ark is basically a perfect action-adventure movie. The practicality and the stunts on the big set pieces, especially the boulder chase, are fantastic, but I also love all the quieter moments. The history and mythology behind the artifacts and adventures is neat to learn about as you go without drifting wholly into being edutainment. She serves as a nice foil to Indy by being almost as capable as him. I also like how this movie and the whole series remain grounded while also mixing it up a little bit with supernatural elements. That ending really is incredible, and charmingly violent too. Temple of Doom is definitely the odd one out. Its opening has this great James Bond thing going on that's really fun if a little bit strange, and they really push the dark stuff. Hearts ripped out, Asian people impaled, the live animal feasts. It's not as interested in building upon real myth and legend, as far as I know at least, but it has a lot of unique and cool locales and fantastic action, the minecart and bridge scenes especially. The Last Crusade is basically perfect. Indy and his father, played by the incredible Sean Connery, have an incredible dynamic. Indy has accomplished so much, but still sees himself as nothing next to his father, and Henry Sr. has this ridiculous, unimpressed air about him that make the two really fun together. The movie's surprisingly funny at a lot of times. Couple that with a great historical mystery, the exciting unraveling of the traps in the Grail's tomb, and the same fantastic action as always with the motorcycle chase, the plane scene. It's the perfect fun action-adventure movie, even more so than the first. All 3 of these movies are fucking fantastic, and all 3 of them bring something different to the table. Temple of Doom may be my least favorite, but I still love how weird and dark it gets, and the weird James Bondy elements and the action. Even though it's my least favorite, it's certainly not a bad movie by any stretch of the imagination. And the other two are so great, it's hard to even make a choice between them. I definitely lean Last Crusade, but both of them just incredible, fun action movies. It's hard to say much more. Anyway, let's wrap this up. LEGO Indiana Jones is the best one yet. While its formula is pretty much the same as the Star Wars games, increased complexity, stronger levels, and some neat twists on the formula make it way more fun to play. The lack of the tedious stuff that plague Complete Saga especially make this a pleasant little game to run through, and I didn't feel worn out at all completing it, which I definitely did towards the end of Complete Saga. Indiana Jones as a property perfectly slots in the LEGO game framework and comes together to be a small, simple, enjoyable game that's good enough to stand on its own, even for non-Indiana Jones fans, which was a much harder thing for me to say about LEGO Star Wars. Although as with those games, its simplicity makes it definitely aim a little bit younger. An older audience probably isn't going to get a lot out of it without nostalgia. Although still, I think it's decently charming and is fun to play with a partner at least.